An Alabama mother and daughter allegedly teamed up to kill a romantic rival, and now one has apparently turned against the other, taking a deal, promising to testify against the other at trial. The victim's family and friends, who have waited years to find out the truth, they are one step closer to getting justice. We're going to sit down also with an Alabama attorney to analyze the plea bargain and what happens next in this very strange case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, we have a major update in just a bizarre story out in Alabama. A mother and daughter, who were both accused of pushing a woman off of a cliff, have apparently turned against each other. That's at least what seems to be happening. Now, we first told you about the case of Mary Elizabeth Isbell here on Sidebar back in February of 2024. That's when then 22-year-old Jessie Kelly submitted character references to a judge, saying that she had a sweet and trusting spirit and was a child of God. Now that same woman has admitted to murdering Mary Elizabeth, who went by Beth. That's how we're going to refer to her, Beth. So let me go back and get you caught up on this case that, by the way, a detective called inhuman and brutal. So we go to November of 2021. Beth, who is a mother to a teenage son, went missing from the Hartselle, Alabama area. Her ex-husband posted on Facebook at the time, "I actually hate to put this out here on social media, but Facebook covers a wide area. Her son hasn't heard from his mom since September 6th on his birthday, and he's really worried about her because she always at least calls him on the holidays. I've talked to her family, and no one has heard from her. So he thought about doing a missing person report." Now, that missing persons report was officially filed just after Christmas in 2021. This is according to Fox 54. According to news outlet AL.com, officials were able to determine where Beth had been living using her phone records. They got a search warrant for her home, turned up physical evidence that showed signs of a struggle, and that included a bloody handprint. But there was no Beth. Well, based on statements from witnesses and later details from the suspects, police believe she died around October 18th or 19th, 2021. And a big break in the case came in summer of 2023, when DeKalb County investigators got a tip, a very important tip, that led them to Loretta Carr and her daughter, Jessie Kelly. Investigators had identified the women as potentially being involved earlier in the investigation, but their suspicions were confirmed thanks to this tip. According to reporting from WAAY, remember I talked about the blood? Investigators confirmed that the blood was in fact Beth's, and that's because she had previously submitted her DNA as part of an old rape kit. But the hand that made that bloody handprint, that was identified as Kelly's, and that was thanks to her prior criminal record. Carr and Kelly, they were brought in for questioning, they were arrested, and they were charged with capital murder. And almost 2 years after she was reported missing, that is when we had an update. Beth's body was found nearly 100 miles away near Fort Payne, Alabama, at the bottom of a cliff in Little River Canyon National Preserve. According to DeKalb investigators, one of the women led them to the victim's exact location.
In the beginning, we knew that there was a possible body there. We just didn't know where. Little River Canyon is like 15,000 acres of national park. There's multiple overlooks that run along Alabama Highway 176, and also there's multiple overlooks on the Cherokee County side of Little River Canyon. So through working with the co-defendant, we were able to narrow down a couple different locations, and that proved to be very accurate, and the information that she gave.
Now, court filings that were seen by WAFF say that Kelly confessed to the crime, told search teams where to find the victim's body, that she was the person. She reportedly said they wanted to make it look like Beth did this to herself, that it was a suicide. Human remains were discovered on June 28th. Beth was officially identified on what would have been her 39th birthday. According to court documents that were reviewed by WAAY, the mother and daughter duo, they showed up at Beth's trailer in October of 2021, fought with her. It's believed that Carr hit the victim multiple times over the head with a pistol, and the pair allegedly took Beth to Carr's house, forced her to shower to get blood off of her, and then took her to Little River Canyon. Court filings indicate that Kelly told police she watched her own mother walk this woman to the edge of a cliff before pushing her off. In fact, WAFF reports that Kelly told police that Beth begged for her life. And in another chilling twist, it has been reported that Carr visited that same preserve in 2019 and even posted a selfie to Facebook. That's the same area where she's accused of killing a woman. Now, for evidentiary point of view, that's going to be important because it will show that she knew the area, that she visited this area, that this is a very specific area where they found Beth. Now, as we're talking a lot about the law here, let me real quick call out an expert on the law, the legal sponsor who helped make this episode happen, Morgan & Morgan. This is America's largest injury law firm. This is a firm with over 1,000 attorneys. You know why they're so big? Because they win a lot. They have recovered over $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. Think about that. In the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. Out in Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million. That's after being offered only $500,000. And even if you think your case isn't worth, millions of dollars, why not start a claim and fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so simple. You can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC sidebar by clicking the link below or scanning the QR code on screen. So now the question is, what led to this? What led to such a brutal killing? What's the why? Well, DeKalb County Sheriff Nick Weldon says the women were all acquaintances. An animosity may have been brewing, connected back to a man, a love interest. Although I will be clear, the exact details on a motive haven't been revealed as of yet. Maybe we'll get that at a trial. But Kelly, who is in jail in Pennsylvania awaiting extradition to Missouri on a theft charge, was eventually extradited to Alabama on the capital murder charge. This is according to news outlet WAFF. Now, a sheriff's deputy told AL.com that she was deliberately held at a different jail from her mom to keep them separated. So Kelly was asking the court for youthful offender status, which we'll get more into in a moment, because she was 20 years old when the crime happened. That was denied. But as part of her request, she had multiple fellow inmates submit letters on her behalf talking about her apparent good character. In February of 2024, Kelly herself wrote to the judge, "I ask that the court to please take these letters in consideration on my behalf of who I am, rather than just what I'm being portrayed in black and white." 8 incarcerated women wrote letters, which included statements like, "She is really a bright, well-meaning, and intelligent young woman who I feel could be easily taken advantage of due to her sweet nature and trusting spirit." Another letter described Kelly as a kind-hearted child of God. But now, Kelly is admitted to murder. Her trial was supposed to start this week, but instead she agreed to a plea deal. So what happened was her charge was dropped. So her charge from capital murder kidnapping was reduced down to just murder. And she was sentenced officially to 40 years in prison with credit for time served behind bars so far. And in exchange, she has to testify truthfully against her own mother, Loretta Carr, at trial. Carr is supposed to go to trial in December. She faces the death penalty if she's convicted. Okay, so to help me dig deeper into the legal angles of this case, I want to bring on Alabama criminal defense attorney Michael P. Hanle. Thank you so much for coming on, Michael. Appreciate it. So have you been following this case at all? What is your reaction to it? Because unfortunately here on Sidebar, we talk about a lot of different crimes. We talk about a lot of killings. This one is incredibly, incredibly cold, as laid out by prosecutors. What's your reaction to this case?
Well, it has an interesting tie-in to my past. My daughter was married in the Little River Canyon up on the side of one of these cliffs several years ago. So when they start looking at the crime scene, it brings back some very interesting thoughts.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. Just so we know, that environment, how steep is that cliff? If you're imagining this woman being walked out to her death and being pushed over, what does that scene look like?
Well, the drops in the canyon can be 60, 70, 100 feet. Think about the Grand Canyon, but stick it in Alabama where you've got trees and vegetation. And that's kind of the environment you're looking at up there.
I mentioned before the social media post or the selfie post that one of the defendants had there. It just makes it so incredibly cold and chilling and eerie. Talk to me, let's talk about the law a little bit. Talk about capital murder versus just murder in Alabama, because that was a significant difference in terms of sentencing. What does it mean when we're talking about capital murder versus murder?
Well, capital murder is just a an elevated class of murder. It comes with an additional aggravator. In this case, that aggravator was kidnapping. So it's just a regular murder that occurs during the course of one of the aggravators that Alabama has created for its capital murder system. The biggest difference between the two, other than that additional aggravator, is the fact that capital murder only has two punishments: the death penalty or life without the possibility of parole. A regular murder carries a punishment of between 10 years and 99 years or life. So that's the main difference between those two. There's also the particularized intent to kill, which comes along with capital murder.
And as we go through these details of this case, I can, obviously the kidnapping component, but the egregious nature of this as well. I'm not surprised that's what the charge was. However, I talked about what her plea deal was and what she was sentenced to. Kelly was requesting youth offender status, even though she was apparently an adult when Beth was killed. How does that work exactly, youth offender status?
Well, in Alabama, anybody who is under the age of 21 years of age has the ability to apply for youthful offender status. It is essentially intended for folks to get that first bite off the apple. I apply all of my clients under the age of 21 for youthful offender status, even those who have committed murders. It is very rare to get a youthful offender grant in a violent felony offense like murder.
Well, why is that? What is the judge? What are the factors weighing against a defendant?
Well, the court is not supposed to rely only upon the crime that the person is charged with, but that seems to be the primary focus. The court's supposed to look at the history of the individual, any mitigating or aggravating circumstances that may surround the defendant's life history, and any aggravating or mitigating circumstances that might apply to the actual offense. So there's a laundry list of things the court should consider. We usually file memorandums to the court, memorandums in support of youthful offender when we do that, kind of breaking down the law and the category of considerations.
And she also, by the way, had a criminal history. So we know that when she was charged in this case, she was awaiting extradition to Missouri for other charges, theft charges. How much impact would prior bad behavior impact the kind of plea deal that the state would offer here? Even though, when we're talking about those charges, she hadn't been necessarily found guilty of those, right, as far as my understanding is. But, when you think about a potential criminal history, how much does that affect a plea deal in a case like that?
Well, if you examine the plea documents in this case, it clearly shows that she has no prior felony convictions. So that was a consideration by the district attorney's office. The fact that she had pending charges elsewhere, you really would have to look at when those charges arose as it relates to this capital murder offense. If they occurred after the conduct of the capital murder, then usually they don't get considered by the DA's office or the judge in a sentencing phase.
What did you think of this deal? 40 years in prison, that's a long time. She will get time, served, but 40 years in prison is very different than life in prison or the death penalty. And the timing of the sentencing you thought was interesting too, right?
I did. There's some speculation that she was going to cooperate against her mother and that she was going to testify and provide some valuable information to the district attorney in exchange for that plea agreement. What I found interesting was that she pled guilty to an amended charge of murder instead of the capital murder in count 1 of her indictment. She has a second count in the indictment, which is a straight murder charge. So they could have dismissed count 1 and let her plead on count 2, but they didn't. The other thing that I found interesting was the fact that she was sentenced immediately following her guilty plea to 40 years. So any agreement that she may have had with the district attorney's office to appear in the future at a trial in an effort to minimize her sentence is really a moot point at this stage.
Can we expand upon that? What happens if she isn't truthful on the stand? The prosecutors say she's reversing what she said she was going to be saying. She's not being truthful. Maybe she's refusing to cooperate. What leverage do they have over her now?
I'm not really sure that they have any leverage. That plea and sentence is a lawful plea and sentence. There are delays that will expire here on the court's ability to maintain jurisdiction over this defendant. And so in a year, if the mom goes to trial and Kelly says, no, I'm not doing it, or she gets up there and says something otherwise, I don't think the state's got a lot of leverage to impact her sentence at that point.
But this could actually work in favor of the state in another way, right? If she gets on the stand and she starts testifying and giving them what they need, it may be difficult for a defense attorney to say, hey, you're saying whatever you need to say to get a favorable deal. She'd be like, I'm already sentenced. It's already been done. What? I could lie if I want to, but I'm not. I'm telling everybody the truth. That's another way of looking at it, right?
Absolutely. And I had this situation in a capital murder case 10 years ago where a co-defendant took a plea to testify against my client. Ultimately, she pled and was sentenced just like Kelly was in this case. And therefore, you have that dual-edged sword. She's not going to get any benefit if she comes forward and continues to cooperate, but I can't cross-examine her on her ability to get a reduced sentence either. So,
yeah, and that's interesting because, it's one thing to talk about someone testifying in a murder case like this, a co-defendant, but a daughter testifying against her mother, and now you have this added complication about the sentence. Have you ever seen that before? I don't think I've ever seen a child testify against a parent as a co-defendant. I've seen them, they're witnesses in a case, victims in a case, but I don't think a co-defendant. I mean, that's an interesting dynamic, to say the least.
It is interesting, and I've never experienced that in my 30-plus years of criminal defense work. I've had husbands and wives charged in capital murders as co-defendants, but I've never had a child as a co-conspirator in a case.
What do you think that testimony is going to look like? What does she need to say?
Well, she's going to need to tell the truth. And that truth would be whatever she did to assist her mother in committing these heinous offenses.
And I think the motivation would be key. I think the way of going to that crime scene, right? Because it's the idea was, right, push her off the cliff. That's the allegation, to make it look like something else. I think they need that connective tissue, right?
They do. They're going to have to draw a connection between, going back to the house and cleaning and taking the shower and then moving from there to the murder scene. So they're going to have her be able to testify about what the plan was and how it unfolded.
Does she need to testify in a way to show that she was in fear, that she was reluctant, to make her more credible? Look, I think about it. 40 years is a long time in prison, but this was a brutal crime. You wonder if that's enough. How does she need to come off to the jury in a case like this in order to get the conviction against her mother?
Well, in having done this for 30 years, I'm confident that Ms. Summerford will prepare her witness to testify in a way that she is credible to the jury. I understand that there may be some intellectual disabilities involved with this witness, and you'll have to be careful how you present her because of those issues. But I think you just want to be a sympathetic witness, and of course, defense counsel is going to try and beat her up the best they can. But again, defense is going to have to be sensitive to any intellectual disabilities that might be there to avoid appearing that they're badgering or beating up on the witness unnecessarily.
This case was, I don't even know if the word is cold, but it was broken after several years of not having answers. It was broken wide thanks to a credible tip. How important is it for people with information to come forward to law enforcement, despite the age of a crime, despite some of the characteristics of a crime? It seems like we might not be here if it maybe wasn't for that tip.
Well, law enforcement is always looking for information, and a good investigator, a good detective, is always out there looking for the clue that will help them, break open a case and provide them with credible evidence. And apparently that's what happened here. So it's important for folks who know something about a crime to be available and to make that known to the police.
If you had to defend Carr, what's the strategy? Is it to strike at the evidence of the prosecution? Is it to put the blame on her daughter? I mean, that also becomes a question of how you cross-examine the daughter and what the goal might be.
Well, I guess the biggest question at this point, not having access to the discovery in the case, would be, we know that there's a bloody handprint that belongs to Kelly. Is there direct evidence that ties the mother to the scene of the crime, or to any portion of that planning and preparation for it? And so if I were representing Ms. Carr, that's what I'm going to have to look at. What are the direct links or the direct evidence that connects her to this, and how do we deflect some of that away from our client?
What a case. Just a savage killing. I can't get over it. Really, the idea of her begging for her life is just hard to get past. Michael P. Hanle, thank you so much for taking the time, and appreciate it. Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
And that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.